Hi, this is John Muller from the JP Muller Group, and today I wanted to talk to you about how to get started with the Our Kids Matters shared expense template for co-parenting. We'll start on the Start Here tab right at the beginning, and on this tab you put in all the basics, and there's really not that much to get the sheet going. Only fill in those cells that have yellow backgrounds. So in this case, let's put first the names. Bob is one parent and Jane is another. The next set of questions will have to do with who pays what expenses. There are generally three types of expenses that we're concerned with. One, expenses that fall under child support, and every situation may be different. Every state has its own rules, so check with your professionals on which items fall under child support. Generally speaking, there are things like food and clothes, etc. So in this case, we're going to select from the drop-down that has both their names. We're going to say Bob pays the child support and Jane receives the child support. Now, if you don't have child support involved in your situation, then you could just choose either one. It won't matter in terms of the performance of the sheet because you won't use the covered by child support checkbox at all. The next thing we want to do is for extraordinary expenses, a second type of expense. These are things that are not covered in child support. So they're traditionally like bigger, not recurring things, like maybe your child goes to camp, right? Or maybe there's something else that's going on, like a prom, etc. And at that point, a lot of agreements say that for those kinds of expenses, one parent pays X percent and the other parent pays Y%. In this case, we're going to say Bob pays 60% of those expenses, extraordinary expenses, and Jane pays 40%, or is responsible for. The next thing we're going to do is put our children's names. In this case, we're going to put Ava and Michael. And the last thing, and you may not have to do anything here, is we have pre-filled a number of categories that are, seem to be pretty common in these situations. Feel free to edit these as you wish, and they will, adjust how the selection menus work on the other tab when we get into the ledger. And that's it. There's some instructions here on how to use a ledger, but I'm not going to go through all those because I'm going to actually walk you through it one thing at a time. So here's the ledger. This is where you would do all of your entry, if you will. And if you'll note, in the upper left-hand corner here, we have it says all settled. This will dynamically change as we enter transactions here. And it'll say who owes who what at that particular moment, based on all the transactions that exist in the ledger to date. Now let's get to our first entry. Our first entry is going to be on January 1st. And here's what we're going to say. A lot of people may start using this sheet when there's already been a lot of transactions, maybe even for years, that have been taking place. And you probably don't want to go back and enter them all, though you could. But you want to memorialize the fact that when you start using the sheet, maybe one partner owes the other some reimbursement, right? So in this case, let's say Bob owes Jane $500. We're going to write that as the item. That's just, it doesn't affect anything. We're just write it so we know what we're talking about. Now, for beginning balances and for reimbursements, you don't choose any children. It's not children specific. It's not really an expense. So we're just going to say that this is a beginning balance. We're going to enter it as Jane paid it. And that's because she outlaid it. That's why Bob owes it to her. Right? And we're going to say it's 100% Bob's responsibility. Okay? And it highlights it in red because I'm overriding that 60-40 we talked about before. And it shows Bob's share is $500, Jane's share is $0. So because Jane paid $5 and Bob's share, what he's responsible for, is $5, Bob owes Jane $500, appears in the upper left. And that's how you enter a beginning balance. The next set of expenses we'll talk about are those that are covered by child support. So sometimes you have to outlay money, but it's already covered by child support. And so we'll go through some of those. So let's say on the 8th, we'll say this is an expense for Ava. And let's say it's sporting equipment. She needed new cleats. So Bob took her out for new cleats, paid $100. The first thing you notice is it automatically filled out the 60-40 split. But actually, this is already covered in child support, so we're going to click here. And what that does is say, well, since Bob pays child support, he's really accountable for none of this additional expense. Jane needs to pay for it out of child support. So therefore, it automatically changes it to a 0-100. Similarly, we'll enter another one. We'll say Ava, some additional sports equipment. Let's say socks and a soccer ball. And let's say it was another $56. And again, we'll choose that it's out of child support. And you'll notice that now Bob only owes, or does owe Jane, $344 instead of that original $500, right? Because this gets credited against what he owed. All right, let's look at it another way. Let's say on 2/6, let's say Michael had some expenses. We'll say that there was some food expenses for school lunch. And let's say that this was $60 and Jane paid it. Again, it's out of child support. Now, again, it changes it to 0% Bob's responsibility, 100% for Jane's. And it doesn't affect the $344 that's owed because Jane has to pay that out of child support. All right, let's do another one that might be out of child support. And again, check with your professionals on what applies to you in your state and your specific situation. Let's say Michael has some clothes. And let's say jeans. And Jane paid $80 for that. Again, we check child support and it goes to a 0-100 split. All right, and doesn't change the total because Jane was paying for it instead of Bob. All right, now the next set of expenses are the ones where the 60-40 split comes in. These are extraordinary expenses. So let's say on 2/22, Michael has an expense. And let's say, we'll call it entertainment. And we'll say it's camp, summer camp. And let's say it's $2,500, okay? And we'll say, in this case, Jane paid it, okay? Notice it'll say attribute $1,500 of the responsibility to Bob and $1,000 to Jane. And therefore, Bob now owes Jane $1,844. Similarly, let's do another one here. Let's say there's 228 in Ava. And let's say this is medical and dental. And she said wisdom, teeth, removal. And let's say that was $1,800 and Bob paid. Notice it'll show Bob's share is supposed to be $1,080 and Jane's share is $720. So $720 credit goes against that and it lowers what Bob owes to Jane again. All right, so that's the extraordinary expenses, the 60-40, whatever you agreed your split was. Now there are children expenses that don't necessarily fall into any of this or special circumstances. So let's say on 3/4, Eva comes to mom and dad and says, Mom and Dad, I want to go away for spring break. And it's going to cost me $1,750. And I talked to Jane and I say, Jane, let's do something nice for her. Why don't we split it 50-50? So we agree 50-50. When we put in the $1,750, it doesn't do that. It fills out 60-40 again automatically. We could enter 50 instead, and it will override it. So there's an overridden expense for which goes 50-50. Okay? You may also have expenses that aren't even child related. but you work with your partner to figure out how you're going to manage that. So let's say on 315, and in these cases, I do want to assign no child to it. So it's an expense, but it's not child specific, if you will. And we're going to say that this is miscellaneous, and we're going to say, let's say this is life insurance. So let's say Bob has a policy where it covers the kids, but also maybe Jane benefits from it somehow. And their agreement is that even though Bob's going to pay, let's say $1,500 for the year, they're going to say that maybe it's 75% Bob's responsibility, but 25% Jane's because she's getting some benefit out of it. All right, that's how you override it. Again, it'll highlight in red, indicating that it's been overridden. So that's how you enter the various expenses. Well, what if we wanted to reimburse each other? So let's say on 4.2, we're going to have a reimbursement. Since it's a money changing hand reimbursement thing, either reimbursement or the beginning balance, we're not going to choose anything under children. What we're going to do is we're going to choose reimbursement under the category. We're going to say Bob reimburses Jane. And because Bob is doing the paying, we're going to say that Bob's going to reimburse Jane, let's say $16.24, pay the full amount of what's owed. And under the percent, we're going to say that Bob's share of this is 0%. We want it all to go to Jane. So we put 0%, that means Jane gets it all, and we're all settled up top. Similarly, let's say we want to do a reverse, and we'll say 4.6, we'll do a reimbursement. If Jane reimburses Bob, let's say $500, Jane does the paying, 100% of it goes to Bob, and now you'll see that Bob now owes Jane $500. Why? Because it was even to begin with. She just gave him $500, so he really owes it to her back. It kind of doesn't make sense in the real world, but for the purpose of showing you how this data entry works here, that's how it works. Again, the sheet with the sample data walks through all these scenarios so that you can see exactly how everything was entered with notes on each one explaining exactly what we entered and why. Now that we've gone through how to enter the various expenses, I wanted to point out some of the reporting that we have here. We have two basic reports we set in here. We have expenses by child, non-child, and other, and we have expenses by month. And you could explore what they're both telling you. And both of them have these slicers, these colorful slicers across the top. And I'm going to add one called categories in here in the release version. And what we could do is we could zoom in on the data or filter down to it based on choosing these selectors. So here I could say clear all, and I just want to see Ava's expenses, right? And here we have all Ava's expenses by month, right? And I could also filter by various dates, etc. Let's say I want to further dive in. I say, well, we had $156 worth of expenses in January. Well, what were those expenses? I could either go back to that whole ledger. That ledger may be very long over time and try to figure out what that is. Or I could just remind myself by double clicking on that 156, and it'll then drill down to the detailed transactions that added up to that monthly number. So that's how you would do that. I can then delete that new tab that it created so I could always get back at it. And if I want to remove that filter, I could go select all again, and I could then see the report tab. And there's any number of ways you can manipulate the data within the reporting, create your own reporting, create your own graphs, everything. And hopefully over time I'll add more functionality to these. But I think this is plenty to get started, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks, and reach out to me with any questions you may have.